Hey guys, tonight we begin with the silent, stone-walled world of the Christian convent under the shadow of the Ottoman crescent. We are stepping into a time when the ringing of a church bell was an act of rebellion, and the walls of a sanctuary were no longer a guarantee of safety. This is the story of women who had sworn their lives to God, only to find their faith tested by an empire that viewed them as subjects, curiosities, and sometimes liabilities. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes. It is dark. Not the comforting darkness of a peaceful night, but the suffocating, heavy darkness of a city that has changed masters. The year is 1453, or perhaps a few decades later. You are in Constantinople, or maybe a dusty outpost in the Balkans, or a sun-bleached island in the Mediterranean. But the location doesn't matter as much as the reality. The Byzantine eagles have fallen, the Ottomans are here, and you, a nun in a secluded convent, are trying to figure out how to survive in a world that no longer belongs to you. For centuries, your order has lived by a rhythm: matins, lauds, vespers. The smell of beeswax candles, the scratch of wool against skin, the taste of stale bread and communion wine. You were the brides of Christ, protected by emperors, respected by the mob, and insulated from the gritty, bloody reality of the streets. But that protection is gone. The emperor is dead, the walls have been breached, and now a new law rules the land. You wake up not to the sound of your own bells, but to the silence. And in that silence, you feel the weight of the new world order. You are a dhimmi now, a protected person of the book, technically allowed to exist, technically allowed to pray. But protection in the Ottoman Empire is a transaction, not a right. And the price of that transaction is steep. It is paid in coin, in humiliation, and in punishments that are rarely written down in the history books, but are burned into the memories of those who lived them. Tonight, we aren't talking about the glorious battles or the grand viziers in silk robes. We are talking about the quiet, terrifying reality of the women left behind in the cloisters, the nuns who had to navigate a legal and social minefield where one wrong look, one loud prayer, or one refused order could bring the wrath of a local pasha down upon their heads. Let's start with the first punishment. It wasn't physical torture. It wasn't chains or dungeons. It was something far more psychological, designed to strip away the voice of your faith until you felt like a ghost in your own city. Punishment number 1, the suffocation of sound. Imagine this. For your entire life, and for generations before you, the day was defined by sound. The church bell was the heartbeat of the community. It told you when to wake, when to pray, when to eat, and when to mourn. It was a sonic claim on the territory, a declaration that this land, this air, belonged to your God. It rang out over the rooftops, drowning out the market noise, the arguments, the chaos of daily life. It was power. And then the decree comes. Under the strictest interpretations of the new Ottoman rule, specifically the Pact of Umar, which was often enforced with varying degrees of severity depending on the mood of the local governor, the sound of Christian worship must not rise above the sound of Islamic life. This meant the bells had to stop. You are standing in the bell tower, your hand hovering over the rough hemp rope. It's time for vespers. Your body knows the rhythm. Your muscles are twitching to pull the rope, to send that familiar, comforting clangor out into the evening air. But you freeze. You know the law. If that bell rings, it is not a call to prayer. It is a crime. It is an act of public display that insults the ruling faith. So, you let go of the rope. You walk back down the stone stairs in silence. The punishment for breaking this silence wasn't always a fine. It was often the destruction of the instrument itself. If a convent was caught ringing its bells too loudly, or at all in some strict districts, the authorities wouldn't just arrest the nun. They would send soldiers to climb the tower and hurl the bells to the ground. You would have to watch as the bronze voice of your community was shattered on the cobblestones. But it went deeper. The punishment for the individual nun caught ringing the bell was often a public shaming known as the mockery of the tongue. The logic was brutal but poetic. You used a metal tongue to offend the public ear, so your own voice must be silenced. Nuns accused of making too much noise during worship, whether by bells or by chanting too loudly with the windows open, could be subjected to days of enforced, absolute silence, monitored by guards stationed at the convent gates. Imagine being forbidden to speak, to sing, to even whisper your prayers loudly enough for the sister next to you to hear. You are trapped in a silent film. The city outside is loud. The muezzin calls from the minarets. The janissaries march with their drums. The merchants shout their wares. But you must be mute. This was the punishment of erasure. By taking away your sound, they were taking away your presence. You could stay in your convent, yes. You could keep your faith, sure. But you had to do it invisibly. You had to become a shadow. And for women whose entire lives were dedicated to the vocal praise of the divine, this silence was a heavy, suffocating blanket. It was a daily reminder that you were guests in your own home, tolerated only as long as you remained unheard. But silence was just the beginning. If the first punishment was about taking away your voice, the second was about taking away your sanctuary. Punishment. 2. The quartering of the wolf. You are sitting in the refectory, eating a bowl of thin lentil soup. The convent is poor, the taxes are high, but at least within these 4 walls, you are safe. The convent is a sacred space, a fortress of chastity and peace. Men are not allowed here. The world of war and politics stops at the heavy wooden door. Or so you thought. There is a pounding at the gate, not a polite knock, but the heavy thud of a boot or the hilt of a scimitar. The Mother Superior rushes to answer it, her face pale. You hear voices, loud, demanding, speaking Turkish. You peek around the corner and your blood runs cold. It is a unit of janissaries, or perhaps irregular troops known as bashi bazouks. They are on the move, marching toward a frontier or suppressing a rebellion, and they need a place to sleep. And under the laws of requisitioning, religious houses were often the first targets for billeting soldiers. This was the punishment of forced quartering. Now, let's be clear. In theory, Ottoman law protected religious sites, but in practice, especially in the provinces or during times of war, a convent was seen as a large, sturdy building with food, beds, and wine cellars. To a tired commander, it wasn't a holy site. It was a free hotel. The punishment here wasn't a judicial sentence. It was the violation of your vows through proximity. Suddenly, your cloistered world is invaded by the very things you swore to leave behind: violence, masculinity, and chaos. You are told to clear out the dormitory. You and your sisters must sleep in the chapel or the stables. The soldiers take your beds. They take your food stores, the grain you saved for winter, the wine you kept for communion, the chickens you raised in the courtyard. You watch as rough men, smelling of sweat, leather, and horse, track mud across the floors you spent hours scrubbing on your knees. They are loud. They gamble in the cloisters. They sharpen their swords on the chapel steps. And you have to serve them. This was the cruelest twist. The nuns were often forced to cook and clean for the soldiers occupying their sanctuary. You are handing a bowl of stew to a man who might have burned a village yesterday, and you have to do it with lowered eyes and a submissive demeanor. If you refuse, if you claim that this is holy ground, that is seen as rebellion. That is seen as treason. And there is a darker undercurrent here, one that isn't always written in the official chronicles, but lives in the margins of letters and local legends. The fear. You are a group of women who have taken vows of chastity, living with a group of armed men who haven't seen their homes in months. The tension in the air is thick enough to choke on. You sleep with one eye open. You move in groups. You never, ever go into the cellar alone. While mass assaults were not official policy and were often punished by strict Ottoman commanders who valued discipline, the threat was the punishment. The psychological torture of having the wolf sleeping in the sheepfold. Every laugh from the courtyard sounds like a threat. Every creak of a floorboard at night sounds like footsteps approaching your door. This forced billeting could last for days or weeks. And when they finally left, they left behind a wrecked home. Larders empty, furniture broken for firewood, icons missing or defaced, but they also left behind a shattered sense of sanctity. The convent was no longer a fortress of God. It had been breached. The world had come in, boots and all, and trampled over your sacred space. This punishment was a reminder of your vulnerability. It told you that your walls were only as high as the Sultan allowed them to be. Your vows meant nothing to a captain who needed a roof for his men. You were not a bride of Christ in that moment. You were a subject of the empire, and your primary duty was to feed the army. And the worst part? You had to be grateful they didn't burn it down. You had to smile, bow, and thank the commander as he rode away, leaving you to sweep up the debris of your holy life. The silence of the bells and the boots in the hallway were just the opening moves. These were punishments of environment, of atmosphere. They were designed to make you feel small, to make you feel watched. But as the years ground on, and the empire's need for control and money grew, the punishments became more personal. They moved from the building to the body, from the spiritual to the physical. You see, survival in this world wasn't just about keeping your head down. It was about proving you had the right to exist. And sometimes, the price of existence was more than just silence or soup. Sometimes it required a sacrifice that cut to the very core of your identity. As night falls over the convent and the soldiers finally march away, You think the worst is over. You think you can go back to the quiet rhythm of prayer and work. But then a messenger arrives with a scroll sealed in wax. It is not a request for housing, it is a summons. The state has noticed you. The state has calculated your worth. And the state has decided that you owe a debt that cannot be paid in prayer. The next punishment is coming, and it won't just invade your home. It will come for the very clothes on your back and the identity you hold most dear. The wax seal on the scroll cracks with a dry snap. It is a sound that echoes in the silent refectory, louder than a gunshot in the stillness of the convent. You unfurl the parchment. The script is elegant, sweeping Arabic calligraphy, beautiful to look at, but terrifying to read. It is a firman, a royal decree from the local governor. You expected a demand for taxes. You expected a demand for grain. But this is something different. This is a demand for conformity. You look down at your habit, the heavy black wool, the wimple that covers your hair, the crucifix that hangs heavy and cool against your chest. These are not just clothes. They are your skin. They are the outward sign of your inward vow. When you put them on, you left the secular world behind. You became something other, something set apart. But the empire does not like things that are set apart. The empire thrives on order, on hierarchy, and on the visual language of submission. And under the strict sumptuary laws of the Ottoman state, you are currently dressed in a dangerous lie. The messenger waits. He doesn't look at you with hatred, but with bored indifference. To him, you are just another administrative task. But to you, the words on that scroll signify the beginning of a humiliation that will strip you bare without ever laying a hand on you. Welcome to the third punishment. It wasn't a dungeon. It was a dress code. Punishment number 3, the branding of the cloth. In the complex social hierarchy of the Ottoman Empire, your clothes were your passport. They told the world who you were, what God you prayed to, and exactly how much respect you deserved or didn't deserve. And for the dhimmi, the Christians and Jews living under the Sultan's protection, the rules were designed to ensure one thing. You must never, ever look like a Muslim, and you must never look like you have power. For a nun, the habit was a symbol of spiritual authority. It commanded respect. Even in the chaos of a conquered city, a woman in a habit was usually given a wide berth. It was a uniform of holiness. But the new laws changed that. The decree forbids the wearing of fine fabrics. It forbids the color green, which is sacred to Islam. It forbids white turbans or specific head coverings reserved for the faithful. But then, the local interpretation tightens the noose. The governor decides that your habit, that long, flowing, dignified robe, is too similar to the robes of Islamic scholars or judges. It is too proud. It creates confusion. You are ordered to change. Imagine the morning this rule is enforced. You are told that you cannot walk through the market in your sacred vestments. You must wear the clothes of a common peasant, or worse, specific colors designated for the kuffar, the unbelievers. In some regions, Christians were forced to wear dingy blues, blacks, or even patches of yellow. You are forced to trade your veil, the symbol of your marriage to God, for a rough, nondescript headscarf that marks you as a servant class. But the punishment for disobedience was where the true horror lay. If a nun was caught wearing her traditional habit in a forbidden zone, or if her veil was deemed too haughty, she wasn't just fined. She faced the stripping of honor. This often happened in the public square. The mutasib, the inspector of markets and morals, would spot you. He would signal to his guards. They wouldn't drag you to jail. They would simply cut the fabric. Imagine standing in the middle of a bustling bazaar, surrounded by merchants, soldiers, and travelers. A guard steps forward with a knife. He slices the hem of your robe, shortening it to a length considered appropriate for a non-believer, which was often humiliatingly short or ragged. Or they might rip the veil from your head. For a nun whose modesty is her shield, this is a violence akin to a physical beating. You are exposed. The crowd laughs, not because they are evil, but because the hierarchy has been restored. You have been reminded of your place. But there was a more insidious version of this punishment. In some provinces, nuns were forbidden from wearing crosses that were visible. The crucifix, the very symbol of your salvation, had to be hidden inside your shirt, pressing into your skin, invisible to the world. If it was seen, it could be ripped off, melted down, or confiscated as contraband gold, even if it was just wood or brass. You start to walk differently. You hunch your shoulders to hide the shape of the cross. You keep your head down to hide your eyes. You wear the drab, rough, spun wool of the peasantry, blending into the mud and the dust. You are still a bride of Christ on the inside, but on the outside, you have been branded as a nobody. The psychological toll is heavy. You look in the mirror, if you have one, and you don't see a sister of the order. You see a prisoner in plain sight. This punishment was designed to break the collective identity of the convent. If you all look like ragged beggars, it is harder to feel like a spiritual army. It dissolves the visual bond of the sisterhood. But while the branding of the cloth attacked your identity, the next punishment attacked your survival. It was a punishment that turned the very elements against you, weaponizing the rain, the wind, and the slow, grinding passage of time. You return to the convent, clutching your rough shawl, trying to regain your dignity. You step into the chapel to pray, seeking solace in the stone walls that have stood for 300 years. But as you kneel, a drop of water hits your forehead. You look up. There is a dark, damp patch spreading across the fresco of the Virgin Mary on the ceiling. A crack in the masonry, a missing roof tile. In any other time, in any other place, this would be a minor annoyance. You would call a mason, you would mix some mortar, you would fix it. But here, under this rule, a hole in the roof is not a maintenance issue. It is a death sentence for the building. Punishment. Number 4. The curse of the crumbling wall. This is perhaps the most brilliant and devastating of all the restrictions placed upon the Christian subjects of the empire. It was bureaucratic, it was bloodless, and it was absolutely lethal. The law was simple. You are allowed to keep your existing churches and convents. You are allowed to worship in them. The Ottomans were proud of this tolerance. "See," they would say, "we do not destroy your temples." But there was a catch. A clause in the legal code that hung over every Christian head like a sword. You could keep your churches, but you could not repair them. Furthermore, you could absolutely never build a new one. If a wall collapsed, it stayed collapsed. If a roof leaked, it stayed leaking. If a fire gutted the dormitory, You slept in the ashes. To repair a religious building required a firman, a special imperial decree from the Sultan himself in Constantinople. And getting a firman was a bureaucratic nightmare that could take years, cost a fortune in bribes, and was often rejected just on principle. So, the punishment for the crime of unauthorized repair was the destruction of the repair itself, and often the imprisonment of those who held the trowel. Picture the winter coming. The crack in the chapel roof has grown. Snow is drifting onto the altar. The damp is rotting the iconostasis, turning centuries-old art into black mold. The sisters are coughing, their breath misting in the freezing air of the sanctuary. You can't live like this. The convent is dying a slow death by erosion. So, you decide to risk it. You wait for a moonless night. You don't hire a mason. That's too risky. He might talk. You and the other sisters gather the materials yourselves. A bucket of mud, some straw, a few stones scavenged from the garden. You climb the ladder in the dark, your hands shaking, your breath held tight in your chest. You are not building a fortress. You are just patching a hole to keep the snow off the face of Christ. Clink. Your trowel hits the stone a little too hard. The sound rings out in the silent night. You freeze. You wait. A dog barks in the distance. Then, silence. You hurry. You slap the mortar on, desperate, clumsy. You cover it with dust to make it look old. You climb down, hiding the tools under your bed. The next morning, the inspector comes. He always comes. He has a network of informants, neighbors who want your land, shopkeepers who want your business, or just zealots who hate the sound of your prayers. He walks into the chapel. He doesn't look at the altar. He looks at the ceiling. He points to the patch of fresh mortar. It's dry, but it's a slightly different shade of gray. Who did this? He asks. Silence. This is an illegal expansion, he declares. It isn't an expansion. It's a patch. But the law is fluid when power is absolute. The punishment is immediate. Soldiers are called in. They don't just scrape away the new mortar. They bring sledgehammers. They smash the entire section of the roof. Where there was a small hole, there is now a gaping wound, open to the sky. But they don't stop there. The Mother Superior is dragged out. She is responsible. She is thrown into the local prison, a dark, wet hole in the ground, until a heavy fine is paid. A fine the convent cannot afford. This punishment forces you into a terrible choice. Watch your holy home rot around you, turning into a ruin while you are still living in it, or risk the destruction of the community to place a single stone. It was a war of attrition waged by weather and time. The Ottomans knew they didn't need to burn the convents down. They just had to wait. Gravity and rain would do the work for them. Every storm was an enemy soldier. Every frost was a siege engine. You spend your nights moving your bed to avoid the leaks. You pray in a chapel where the wind howls through cracks in the walls. You watch the frescoes peel and flake, the faces of the saints disappearing bit by bit, just as your own presence in the city is fading. It is a slow, grinding erasure. You are living in a dying body. The convent, once a symbol of permanence, is now a clock counting down to its own collapse. And yet, you stay. You huddle together for warmth. You pray harder, because if you leave, the building is abandoned. And if it is abandoned, the law says it can be converted. It can become a mosque, a stable, or a quarry. As long as one nun remains to light a candle, it is still a church. So you endure the cold. You endure the rot. You become the living mortar holding the stones together. But the state is not done with you. You have been silenced. You have been invaded. You have been stripped of your habit. You have been left to freeze. But you still have something they want. You have a lineage. You have a connection to the people. And you have the ability to teach. The next punishment is designed to sever that connection. It is not about bricks or cloth. It is about the mind. It is about the future. As the snow melts and the spring mud turns the streets to sludge, a new order is posted on the market walls. It concerns the protection of the youth. It sounds benevolent. It sounds administrative. But when you read it, you realize it is a chokehold on the next generation. They are coming for the novices. They are coming for the books. And they are about to turn your convent into a prison of ignorance. The spring mud in the courtyard is thick and cloying, sucking at your worn sandals as you cross to the scriptorium, or what used to be the scriptorium. Now, it is a storage room for sacks of grain and old tools. The desks where sisters once copied the Gospels are pushed against the wall, gathering dust. The ink has dried in the wells. The parchment is brittle and yellowing. You are holding a small, tattered book, a primer for teaching Greek or perhaps Old Church Slavonic. You hide it in the folds of your sleeve as you pass the gatekeeper. He is an old man, a local Christian hired by the governor to watch the convent, but his eyes are tired, and he looks the other way. You enter a small cell at the back of the complex. Inside, 3 young girls are waiting. They are novices, barely teenagers, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hunger. They want to learn. They want to read the words of the saints. They want to understand the history that brought them here. But teaching them is a crime. Under the tightening grip of the new laws, the transmission of Christian culture is viewed with deep suspicion. The empire tolerates your faith, but it does not want it to grow. It does not want it to be intellectual. It wants a compliant, quiet population of tax-paying peasants, not a generation of literate, fiery believers who know their rights and their history. So, the next punishment is designed to sever the link between the past and the future. Punishment, Drugra 5, the starvation of the mind. For centuries, convents were centers of learning. Nuns were often among the most educated women in society. They ran schools, they copied manuscripts, they kept the records of the community. But now, public education by Christian institutions is heavily restricted. You can teach religion, yes, but only the basics: liturgy, prayer, obedience. Anything else, history, philosophy, advanced theology, is considered seditious. It suggests that you are building a nation within a nation. The punishment for running a secret school, a Krypha scholia, as the Greeks would later call it, was the confiscation of the library. Imagine the scene. A raid. Not by soldiers looking for gold, but by officials looking for paper. They storm into the convent. They don't go for the chalices or the candlesticks. They go for the books. You watch as they pull the ancient codices from the shelves, books that your predecessors spent lifetimes copying by hand, books with illuminations of gold leaf and lapis lazuli, books that contain the soul of your order. They pile them in the courtyard. They don't burn them. That would be too barbaric, too visible. Instead, they cart them away. They are taken to the governor's palace to be examined for heresy. You never see them again. They rot in a damp cellar, or they are sold to foreign collectors. or they are pulped to make paper for administrative ledgers. But for the nun who was teaching, the punishment is the chain of ignorance. You are forbidden from taking on new novices for a period of 5 or 10 years. The convent is effectively sterilized. You cannot reproduce your order. You watch the older sisters die one by one, their beds emptying, their voices silencing in the choir, and there are no young voices to replace them. The convent begins to feel like a tomb. The hallways are quiet. The work is harder because there are fewer hands to do it. You are the last of your kind, a dying breed, kept alive only to pay taxes until you fade away into history. This punishment is a slow strangulation. It forces you to watch your own extinction. It tells you that your faith has no future, that your wisdom dies with you. But you fight back. You teach in the dark. You whisper the history of Byzantium, of the martyrs, of the saints, while you are weeding the garden. You trace letters in the dirt with a stick and then wipe them away before anyone sees. You become a living book, carrying the knowledge in your memory because it is too dangerous to write it down. You are saving the mind of your people, one whispered lesson at a time. But while you are fighting for the mind, the empire is finding new ways to exploit the body, not through violence, but through economy. The convent is not just a spiritual house, it is a business. You own land, you produce wine, honey, wax, and embroidery. And the empire, always hungry for coin, has decided that your labor belongs to them. Punishment, Jour 6, the tax of the shadow. You are in the workroom, your fingers bleeding from the needle. You are embroidering a caftan. It is exquisite work, gold thread on velvet, intricate floral patterns that twist and turn like vines. This is not for the altar. It is not for a priest. It is for the wife of the local pasha. You are working for free. Or, technically, you are working to pay a debt that never ends. The jizya is the tax on non-Muslim subjects. It is heavy, it is humiliating, and it must be paid in cash. But convents, often cash-poor but labor-rich, faced an additional burden: the angary, forced labor for the state. Because nuns were skilled, expert weavers, healers, and cooks, they were often conscripted to provide goods for the local administration. The punishment for failing to meet these quotas was the seizure of the harvest. Imagine it is late autumn. You have spent the entire summer tending the olive groves. Your back aches from bending over the rocky soil. Your hands are stained black from the olives. You have pressed the oil, filling the great clay jars in the cellar. This oil is your life. It lights your lamps. It cooks your food. It is the only thing you have to trade for wheat for the winter. Then the tax collector arrives. He has a ledger. He looks at your jars. "The quota has increased," he says. "The army is on the move. We need oil." He doesn't take 10%, he takes half, then he takes more. He leaves you with just enough to survive, but not enough to thrive, not enough to fix the roof, not enough to buy medicine for the sick sister in the infirmary. If you protest, if you hide a jar, that is theft from the Sultan. The punishment is the quartering of your livestock. They take the goats. They take the donkey you use to haul water. They take the chickens. Now, you are not just working for the pasha. You are starving for him. You are forced to forage for wild greens. You mix sawdust into your bread. You boil leather to make soup. The convent becomes a place of gnawing, constant hunger. But the psychological punishment is worse. You are creating beauty for the very people who oppress you. You are weaving the gold thread that adorns the man who silenced your bells. You are pressing the oil that lights the mosque while your own chapel sits in darkness. It is a profound alienation of labor. Your work, which should be an act of worship, becomes an act of servitude. You are a slave in all but name. And yet, you sow, you press, you harvest, because the alternative is eviction. If the convent cannot pay its taxes, the land is seized, the deed is revoked, and you are thrown out onto the street, a group of destitute women in a world that has no place for you. So you prick your finger with the needle, and a drop of blood falls onto the velvet. You quickly wipe it away. You cannot ruin the pasha's coat. You stitch your resentment into the fabric, a hidden curse in every loop of gold thread. You have been silenced. You have been invaded. You have been shamed. You have been left to rot. You have been isolated from the youth. You have been robbed of your labor. You think there is nothing left to take. You have nothing left but your body and your soul. But the empire is inventive. It knows that the deepest pain comes not from what is taken from you, but from what you are forced to give up voluntarily. As the years turn into decades, a new pressure begins to build. It comes from within your own community, from the families who used to support you. They are converting. They are changing their names. They are leaving the faith to escape the tax, to escape the shame, to give their children a future. And the convent? It is becoming an island in a rising sea. The next punishment is not a law. It is a choice, a terrible, impossible choice that will be placed before one of your sisters, a choice between her vows and her freedom. The gates are opening, a carriage is waiting, and the woman stepping into it is not a soldier or a tax collector. It is a sister you have prayed with for 20 years. She is leaving, and she is not coming back. The carriage wheels grind against the cobblestones, a harsh, rhythmic crunching that fades into the distance. You stand at the heavy wooden gate, watching the dust settle in the evening light. The sister who just left, Sister Maria, who sang the psalms with a voice like clear water, who tended the sick with hands that never shook, she is gone. She did not leave in a coffin. She left in a silk dress, her face veiled not by the wimple of the order, but by the sheer embroidered gauze of a bride. You turn back to the courtyard, and the silence is deafening. The other sisters are weeping, but they are weeping quietly. Their tears soaking into the rough wool of their sleeves. They are not mourning a death, they are mourning a defection, or worse, a theft. You walk to the chapel, you light a candle, but you do not light it for her health, you light it for her soul. In the eyes of the order, she has died. She has broken the ultimate vow. She has been taken by the world you swore to reject. This brings us to the 7th punishment. It was the most intimate violation of all. It wasn't a tax on your grain or a lock on your tongue. It was the seizure of the person. Punishment, Sugar 7, the abduction of the vow. We often hear about the devshirme, the blood tax, where the Ottoman state took Christian boys, converted them to Islam, and trained them to be janissaries, the elite soldiers of the Sultan. It is one of the most famous and brutal aspects of Ottoman rule. But there is a shadow side to this history, one that is rarely spoken of in the textbooks, but haunted the nightmares of every mother superior in the Balkans and Anatolia. There was no official empire-wide devshirme for girls. There was no imperial decree demanding a quota of nuns for the capital, but there was the reality of power dynamics in a conquered land. A young, beautiful woman, even one in a habit, was seen by some powerful men not as a holy vessel, but as a prize. The punishment here was legally complex and devastatingly simple. Under Islamic law, if a Christian converted to Islam, all their previous ties, debts, and vows were instantly dissolved. A conversion washed the slate clean. So, if a local bey or a janissary commander or a wealthy merchant decided he wanted a woman from the convent, he didn't have to break in and drag her out screaming. That would be messy. That would cause unrest. No, he simply had to claim that she had converted. Imagine the scenario. It is a hot afternoon. The sisters are working in the garden, tending the herbs near the outer wall. A group of men rides by. They stop, they watch, one of them points. A few days later, the Mother Superior is summoned to the Sharia court. She is told that Sister Maria has seen the light of the true faith. She has recited the Shahada. She is now a Muslim. And because she is a Muslim, her vows of chastity to the Christian God are null and void. She is free to marry. And conveniently, she has already agreed to marry the man who spotted her in the garden. You try to protest. You say she was coerced. You say she was threatened. You say she would never abandon her faith. But your testimony is that of a dhimmi. It is worth half that of a Muslim man. And if she stands there, veiled, surrounded by armed guards, and nods her head, whether out of fear for her life or because they have threatened to burn the convent if she refuses, there is nothing you can do. This was the abduction of the vow. It was a legalized kidnapping that hid behind the veil of religious conversion. It wasn't just about lust, it was about dominance. Taking a bride of Christ and making her a mother of Muslim sons was a powerful symbolic victory. It was a way of grafting the conquered population into the ruling elite, erasing their past and rewriting their future. For the nuns left behind, the psychological toll was catastrophic. You looked at the empty seat in the refectory, and you wondered, did she break? Did she fall in love? Or was she stolen? You live in constant terror that you might be next. The convent, which was supposed to be a fortress of chastity, feels like a marketplace where the goods are on display, waiting for a buyer with enough power to ignore the rules. You start to hide the young novices. You send them to the cellars when strangers approach. You smudge their faces with dirt to make them look old or sick. You stop working in the garden near the road. You retreat deeper into the shadows, making yourself as unappealing, as invisible as possible. You are no longer just fighting for your soul. You are fighting for your body. But the empire's hunger for erasure didn't stop at the living. Once they had taken your voice, your home, your labor, and your sisters, they turned their eyes to the ground beneath your feet. You are walking through the convent grounds, past the vegetable patch, to the small, enclosed cemetery behind the chapel. This is the holiest ground you own. It is where centuries of sisters are buried. Simple wooden crosses, mounds of earth covered in wildflowers. It is the history of your order, written in bone and soil. But as you approach, you hear the sound of pickaxes. You see men with shovels standing on the graves. They are measuring the land. They are driving stakes into the earth, right through the resting place of Mother Elena, who died 50 years ago. You run forward. "Stop," you cry. "This is sacred ground." The foreman looks at you. He holds a map. "Not anymore," he says. "The city is growing. The Pasha needs a new road, or a new bathhouse, or a new market." Punishment. 8. The excavation of the ancestors. This was the punishment of the physical erasure of history. In the Ottoman worldview, land was a resource, and the rights of the dead, especially the Christian dead, were often secondary to the needs of the living city. As urban centers expanded, convents that had once been on the outskirts found themselves swallowed by the sprawling city, and the land they sat on became valuable. The law stated that Christian cemeteries could not be expanded, but often they were simply expropriated. The punishment for occupying valuable land was eviction, not just for you, but for your ancestors. Imagine the horror of being told you have 3 days to move the dead. You cannot stop them. The decree is signed. If you don't move the bodies, the workmen will simply dig them up and throw them into a common pit, or use the tombstones as paving slabs for the new road. You have seen it happen. You have walked on streets in the city where you can still see the faint outline of a cross or a name carved into the cobblestones under your feet. So, you have to do the unthinkable. You have to desecrate your own graves to save them. It happens at night, by torchlight. The sisters gather with shovels and sacks. You are weeping as you dig. You are disturbing the rest of women you loved, women who mentored you, women who were saints in your eyes. You strike the wood of a coffin. It splinters. You have to reach in and gather the bones. The skull of an abbess who led the convent through the last plague, the ribcage of a novice who died of fever. You wrap them in linen, treating them as relics, but feeling like a grave robber. The smell of the earth, the sight of the decay. It is a trauma that sears itself into your mind. You are unmaking the history of your community. And then you have to hide them. You can't bury them in a new cemetery because you aren't allowed to build one. So you stack the bones in the crypt of the chapel. You hide them in the walls. You create an ossuary in the cellar, a room filled with the skulls of your sisters, watching you from the darkness. This punishment tells you that you have no roots here. It tells you that your history is temporary, that your presence on this land is a lease that can be revoked at any moment. It turns the convent into a place of transience. You are not planting trees for the future. You are digging up the past to keep it from being paved over. The psychological weight of this is crushing. In the Christian tradition, the body is the temple of the Holy Spirit, awaiting the resurrection. To disturb it is a sacrilege. To be forced to do it yourself is a spiritual violation that leaves you feeling unclean, guilty, and utterly defeated. You stand in the crypt, surrounded by the sacks of bones. The sun is rising outside, shining on the new construction site where the cemetery used to be. The world is moving on. The empire is building over you, layer by layer, burying your existence under stone and mortar. You feel the walls closing in. The silence you were forced to keep, the soldiers you were forced to feed, the clothes you were forced to wear, the sisters you were forced to lose, and now the ancestors you were forced to disturb. Is there anything left? Is there any part of your life that the state has not touched, regulated, or violated? You retreat to the altar. You look at the icon of Christ. You think, At least we have our faith. At least we have the liturgy. At least we can pray. But the empire is smart. It knows that martyrdom makes saints. It knows that direct persecution often strengthens resolve. So, it has saved the most insidious, the most bureaucratic, and the most final punishments for the end. They are not coming for your bones anymore. They are coming for your soul. They are coming to twist the very structure of your leadership and to turn your sanctuary into a prison from which there is no release. The final two punishments are approaching. One will corrupt the leadership of your order, turning your protectors into your jailers. And the final one is the punishment of total, absolute, and silent extinction. You hear the heavy iron key turn in the lock of the main gate, but this time it is not being locked from the inside to keep the world out. It is being locked from the outside. The iron key turns in the lock with a sound that feels like a bone snapping. But as you stand there, staring at the heavy timber of the gate, a cold realization washes over you. The person holding the key, the person locking you in, is not a Turkish guard. It is not a tax collector. It is not a soldier of the Sultan. It is your new Mother Superior. She stands on the other side of the courtyard, wrapped in the same black wool as you, holding the same rosary. But her eyes are different. They are calculating. They are cold. They are the eyes of a woman who knows exactly how much this position cost and exactly who she has to pay back. You retreat to your cell, the sanctuary that has become a prison. You realize that the empire hasn't just surrounded you. It has infiltrated you. It has turned the hierarchy of the church, the very structure meant to protect you, into a mechanism of extraction. We have explored the silence, the invasion, the shame, and the erasure. But the ninth punishment is the most insidious of all, because it breaks the one thing you had left: trust. It is the punishment of spiritual betrayal. Punishment number 9, the poisoned chalice, the simony of survival. To understand this punishment, you have to understand how the Ottoman Empire managed its Christian subjects. It didn't just rule them, it co-opted their leaders. Under the millet system, the Patriarch in Constantinople was responsible for the behavior and the taxes of the entire Orthodox community, but the position of Patriarch and the positions of the bishops below him were not given freely. They were sold. The Berat, the imperial warrant giving a bishop his authority, cost a fortune in gold, and that cost rolled downhill like a landslide of debt until it crushed the smallest, poorest convents at the bottom. The punishment here was the monetization of the soul. Imagine the day the old Mother Superior dies. She was a saintly woman, a shield against the world. You mourn her. You pray for a successor who will guide you with wisdom. But the election is a sham. The local bishop who owes thousands of akçe to the pasha for his own position intervenes. He doesn't care about piety. He cares about revenue. He installs a new abbess, perhaps a woman from a wealthy merchant family who paid a bribe, or a cousin of a collaborator. This new abbess is not a shepherd, she is a warden. The atmosphere in the convent changes overnight. The prayer schedule is shortened because prayer does not pay the tax. The work hours in the fields are doubled. The food rations are cut, not for penance, but for profit. The grain you harvest isn't used to feed the poor anymore. It is sold to pay the bishop's debts. You are no longer nuns serving God. You are serfs serving an ecclesiastical landlord who serves an Ottoman master. And the punishment for questioning this? It is spiritual blackmail. If you complain that the new abbess is cruel, or that she is selling off the convent's silver icons to pay bribes, you are accused of disobedience. And in a religious order, disobedience is a sin. The corrupt leadership uses your own vows against you. They tell you that your suffering is God's will. They tell you that your hunger is a test of faith. You are trapped in a loop of gaslighting. The very people who are supposed to protect your soul are selling your labor to the empire. This corruption rots the convent from the inside. Suspicion spreads like a virus. Sisters start informing on each other to curry favor with the new abbess. The communal spirit, the bond that allowed you to survive the soldiers and the silence, begins to fracture. You look at the woman praying next to you, and you wonder, is she a spy? Is she writing a report to the bishop? This was the genius of the Ottoman system. It didn't need to station a guard in every hallway. It simply forced the church to police itself. It turned the convent into a sweatshop of piety, where the product was tax revenue, and the workers were women who had sworn an oath they could not break. You live in this twilight state for years. You watch the convent crumble not from Ottoman cannons, but from greed. The roof leaks, and the money to fix it goes to a bribe. The icons fade, and the gold to restore them goes to a tax. You are hollowed out. You are exhausted. You are spiritually starving in a house of God. And then, finally, comes the end. The empire has extracted everything it can. The land is exhausted. The building is a ruin. The community is broken. You are no longer profitable. You are no longer useful. And in the eyes of the state, if you are not useful, you do not exist. The 10th and final punishment is not an act of violence. It is an act of administration. It is the bureaucratic stroke of a pen that erases 1,000 years of history. Punishment. Chapter 10. The decree of the living ghost. Total dissolution. It is a quiet morning. Too quiet. The bell tower is empty. The garden is overgrown with weeds. There are only 3 of you left now. You are old. Your hands are gnarled with arthritis from decades of weaving and digging. A government official arrives at the gate. He is young, dressed in clean silk, holding a ledger. He doesn't look angry. He looks bored. He walks past you as if you are a piece of furniture. He inspects the walls. He measures the courtyard. He takes notes. Then he turns to you and delivers the verdict. This property has been designated as mahlul. Mahlul. It means vacant or heirless. It is a legal term used for land that has been abandoned. But we are here, you say. Your voice is a dry rasp. We are living here. He looks through you. The registry shows this institution is defunct. The numbers do not justify its existence. The state is reclaiming the land for public use. This is the punishment of administrative erasure. It is the final, crushing blow. You are not being martyred. You are being evicted. The state has decided that your convent is no longer a convent. It is just a building, and you are just squatters. You are given 24 hours to leave. Imagine the panic. Where do you go? You have no money. You have no family. They died decades ago, or they converted, or they forgot you. You have been cloistered for 50 years. The world outside those walls is a terrifying, alien place. You pack your few belongings, a wooden cross, a spare tunic, a book of prayers with the cover torn off. You walk through the chapel one last time. You blow out the lamp that has been burning since the fall of Constantinople. You touch the cold stone of the altar. You are saying goodbye to your life. As you walk out of the gate, you see the workmen waiting. They are not there to repair the roof. They are there to strip the lead. They are there to turn the sanctuary into a warehouse for wool, or a stable for cavalry horses, or a quarry for a new mosque down the road. You walk into the city, a ghost in a ragged habit. People walk past you, ignoring you. You are a relic of a time they don't want to remember. You are a living reminder of a conquered past. You find shelter in the doorway of a ruined church, or perhaps in the back room of a sympathetic Christian family who risks a fine to house you. But you are no longer a nun. You are a beggar. This is the ultimate punishment. It is the denial of your identity. You die not as a bride of Christ, surrounded by your sisters, chanting the psalms of ascent. You die alone, in the dirt of a strange alley, while the stones of your convent are used to pave the streets of the new empire. It is a death of silence, a death of forgetting. Conclusion. So, why do we tell this story? Why do we dig up these painful, dusty memories of women who were silenced centuries ago? Because their silence is part of the history. When we look at the grand timeline of the Ottoman Empire, we see the battles, the sultans, the golden age of architecture and art. We see the sweeping geopolitical changes. But history is not just made by the people who hold the sword or the pen. It is made by the people who endure. The nuns of the Christian East faced a machinery of empire designed to grind them down. They faced a legal system that viewed them as second-class subjects, a military system that viewed them as logistical resources, and an economic system that viewed them as revenue streams. They were punished with silence. They were punished with intrusion. They were punished with shame. They were punished with the theft of their sisters and the desecration of their ancestors. And finally, they were punished with oblivion. And yet, they survived. Not all of them, and not the buildings. The buildings fell. The books were burned. The bells were melted down. But the memory survived. It survived in the whispered stories told by grandmothers in mountain villages. It survived in the secret schools where children learned to read Greek or Armenian by candlelight. It survived in the stubborn persistence of a faith that refused to be taxed out of existence. These 10 punishments were designed to break the spirit of the Christian nun. They were designed to make her give up, convert, or fade away. But if you go to the Balkans today, or to the old quarters of Istanbul, or the monasteries of the Levant, you will still see them. You will see women in black habits, lighting candles in ancient churches that bear the scars of centuries. You will hear the chanting of the liturgy, rising like smoke, defying the silence. They are the descendants of the women who held the line. They are the daughters of the ghosts who refused to leave. They remind us that while empires can conquer land and laws can control bodies, the human spirit, fueled by faith and bound by sisterhood, is the hardest thing in the world to kill. The Ottomans are gone. The sultans are dust. The janissaries are a memory. But the nuns? The nuns are still there, and they are still praying. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the shadows of history. It's a heavy story, I know, but it's one that deserves to be heard. If you found value in this, if you felt the weight of their silence and the strength of their endurance, please hit that like button. It helps these stories reach more people. And if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a documentary. Sleep well, guys. And remember, history is watching.